Welcome to our series on transportation planning, essential concepts and terminology. Today, in the final lecture of the series, we will focus on transportation project evaluation. Transportation project evaluation is a technical process that systematically analyzes and organizes forecast data to support decision-making and identify the alternative that is expected to generate the greatest positive socio-economic effects. However, it is important to recognize that transportation project evaluation is not decision-making itself. Rather, it is a technical process that connects scientific and objective analytical results with the decision-making process. Based on when the evaluation is conducted, it can generally be classified into two categories. The first is ex-ante evaluation, which assesses the feasibility and expected impacts of a project before its implementation. This is an essential process for preventing the wasteful use of substantial public funds and for determining appropriate investment priorities. The second is ex-post evaluation, which examines actual operating conditions after a project has been completed to determine whether the objectives anticipated at the planning stage have been achieved. Ex-post evaluation not only verifies the performance of the project, but also serves as an important feedback mechanism by identifying the actual effects of implemented transportation policies and providing guidance for modifying or improving existing plans and future planning frameworks. In this lecture, we will focus on ex-ante evaluation, which is more analytically complex and plays a central role in practical transportation decision-making. Transportation project evaluation can be broadly classified into three methods: economic efficiency analysis, multi-criteria analysis, or MCA, and cost-effectiveness analysis, or CEA. First, economic efficiency analysis compares the costs and benefits of a project after converting both into monetary values. This provides an objective basis for evaluating the economic feasibility of a project and for determining investment priorities under limited budgets. Second, multi-criteria analysis evaluates multiple policy objectives that are difficult to express in monetary terms. Decision-makers can use techniques such as the analytic hierarchy process, or AHP, to assign importance weights to different evaluation criteria and score the performance of each alternative, thereby producing an overall evaluation result. This approach is particularly useful when policy decisions need to reflect the views of various stakeholders and consider a broader range of social values. Third, cost-effectiveness analysis measures costs in monetary terms while evaluating policy effects using physical indicators, such as the number of accidents reduced or the amount of greenhouse gas emissions reduced. This approach allows alternatives to be compared directly based on their physical outcomes without converting all effects into monetary values. It is particularly useful for identifying the alternative that can achieve the greatest policy effect within a given budget. These three methods are not competing alternatives, but rather complementary evaluation techniques. When economic efficiency is the primary concern, economic efficiency analysis becomes the main approach. When a broader range of social values needs to be considered, multi-criteria analysis can be more appropriate. Likewise, when physical outcomes such as safety or environmental performance are particularly important, cost-effectiveness analysis can be effectively applied. In practice, these methods are often combined according to the purpose of the evaluation and the decision-making context. Among these methods, economic efficiency analysis is widely used in the transportation field because it provides objective indicators for assessing a project's economic feasibility by comparing its costs and benefits in monetary terms. Therefore, in this lecture, we will focus on economic efficiency analysis and examine the basic principles of transportation project evaluation. The most important benefit in economic efficiency analysis is user benefit, which is measured using the economic concept of consumer surplus. Consumer surplus refers to the total benefit users receive from the difference between the maximum amount they are willing to pay for a transportation service, or their willingness to pay, and the actual travel cost they incur. In economic efficiency analysis, this consumer surplus is used as a key component of social benefits. Let's look at the graph to better understand this concept. The demand curve represents the maximum amount that users are willing to pay for a transportation service. When the current travel cost is C0, triangle A, which lies between the demand curve and the travel cost line, represents the consumer surplus or user benefit. Consumer surplus is expressed in monetary terms. Next, cost includes not only the project costs required to construct transportation facilities, but also the costs incurred for their operation and maintenance. Since both benefits and costs are measured in monetary terms, they can be directly compared to evaluate the economic feasibility of a project. In economic efficiency analysis, we compare the existing condition without the project, referred to as the do-nothing scenario, with the condition after implementing the project, referred to as the do-something scenario. Before the project, when the travel cost is C0, the existing user benefit is represented by triangle A, which is the existing consumer surplus. After the project is implemented, suppose the travel cost decreases to C1. Existing users gain additional benefits from the reduction in travel cost, represented by rectangle B. In addition, new trips are induced by the lower travel cost. The benefit generated by these additional trips is represented by triangle C. Therefore, the total consumer surplus after the project is A plus B plus C. However, the incremental benefit generated by the transportation project excludes the existing consumer surplus, triangle A. It is therefore the sum of rectangle B and triangle C. In economic efficiency analysis, this incremental benefit is compared with the project costs to evaluate the economic feasibility of a transportation project.
4 key indicators are commonly used to evaluate the economic feasibility of transportation projects: the benefit-cost ratio, or BC ratio, net present value, or NPV, internal rate of return, or IRR, and payback period. Each indicator evaluates economic feasibility from a different perspective. In practice, the BC ratio is generally used as the primary criterion, while NPV and IRR are also considered to provide a more comprehensive basis for decision-making. First, the benefit-cost ratio is the ratio of total discounted benefits to total discounted costs. In other words, it indicates how much social benefit is generated per unit of cost. Because it is a ratio-based measure, it is particularly useful for comparing the investment efficiency of alternatives with different project scales. In general, a project is considered economically feasible when its BC ratio is 1.0 or higher. Second, net present value is the present value of net benefits, calculated by subtracting total discounted costs from total discounted benefits. As an absolute monetary measure, it shows the amount of net benefit that a project generates for society. Therefore, a large-scale project may have a relatively low BC ratio, but still produce a high NPV. NPV is thus useful for evaluating the overall net economic impact of a project. Third, the internal rate of return is the discount rate at which the net present value becomes zero. It represents the project's intrinsic rate of return. When the IRR is higher than the social discount rate, the project is generally considered to be economically attractive. The IRR is particularly useful when evaluating the financial feasibility of privately financed projects. Finally, the payback period is the time required to recover the initial investment. This indicator is useful for assessing how quickly the invested capital can be recovered and for evaluating investment risk. It is mainly used in the financial analysis of private sector investments. In contrast, it is used relatively less frequently in the economic evaluation of public transportation projects. In this lecture, we will focus primarily on the BC ratio in order to understand the basic principles of economic feasibility analysis.
In the economic feasibility analysis of large-scale transportation projects, it is important to determine which items should be included as benefits and costs. Here, we will briefly examine the major items using Korea's preliminary feasibility study guidelines as an example. Let us first look at the major benefit components. First, travel time savings. This represents the monetary value of the time saved through reductions in travel time. In most transportation projects, travel time savings account for the largest share of total benefits. Second, vehicle operating cost savings. These include savings in fuel, engine oil, tires, and other consumables, as well as reductions in vehicle maintenance costs and depreciation. Third, traffic accident reduction benefits. These represent the reduction in social costs resulting from fewer traffic accidents following improvements to transportation facilities. They include costs associated with both human casualties and property damage. Fourth, environmental cost savings. These represent the reduction in social costs resulting from lower levels of air pollution and noise. Other benefits may also be included, such as savings in parking costs resulting from increased public transit use. The specific benefit items considered depend on the characteristics of the project, such as whether it involves a highway, railway, airport, or port. On the cost side, the major items include total construction costs, land acquisition and compensation costs, and, in the case of public transit projects, vehicle or rolling stock costs. Operation and maintenance costs are also included. In addition, the residual value of the facility at the end of the analysis period is also taken into account. In general, costs can be measured relatively objectively because they are based primarily on actual expenditures. Benefits, however, often require physical or social effects, such as travel time savings and environmental improvements, to be converted into monetary values. Therefore, quantifying benefits using reasonable and consistent monetary values is one of the most important steps in economic feasibility analysis. The value of money changes over time due to factors such as inflation and the opportunity cost of capital. This concept is known as the time value of money. Therefore, to make a fair comparison between the costs incurred during the construction of a transportation facility and the user benefits generated over several decades after its completion, monetary values occurring at different points in time must be converted to a common point in time. For this purpose, economic feasibility analysis applies a social discount rate to convert all costs and benefits into their equivalent present values, using a common base year, typically the present year, as the reference point. This allows costs and benefits occurring at different points in time to be compared consistently on the same basis. The formulas shown on the screen illustrate this conversion process. Equation 1 converts a future lump sum amount, S, into its present value, P. This equation is mainly used for one-time investment, such as construction costs. Equation 2, on the other hand, converts a recurring annual cost, R, such as operation and maintenance costs, into its present value. By applying these formulas to all costs and benefits occurring throughout the project life, we can calculate the total present value of costs and benefits at the base year. These values are then used to calculate key economic feasibility indicators such as the benefit-cost ratio, net present value, and internal rate of return. Economic feasibility analysis is one of the most widely used methods for evaluating transportation projects. However, the analysis involves various limitations and uncertainties. Dickey identified 16 issues related to these limitations. In this lecture, we will group them into 4 logical categories and examine their main implications. The first category concerns the scope of analysis and the definition of evaluation items. It is often difficult to determine how far the analysis should extend beyond the direct effects of a project to include indirect or wider impacts. It is also difficult to identify and include all relevant costs and benefits without omission. In particular, the same benefit may be counted more than once, or an effect that is simply transferred from one group to another may be mistakenly treated as a new social benefit. It is also difficult to determine how far indirect effects, such as multiplier effects on the regional economy or broader social impacts associated with achieving policy objectives, should be included in the analysis. The second category concerns measurement and monetary valuation of costs and benefits. Intangible effects, such as environmental improvements and better quality of life, are difficult to express in objective monetary terms. Even when different types of effects and costs can be converted into monetary values, the process involves various assumptions and potential sources of error. Market prices may also fail to accurately reflect true social values when they include taxes or subsidies. In addition, it is not always easy to objectively reflect the difference between the value perceived by users and the economic value measured from a broader social perspective. The third category is uncertainty in forecasting the future. Transportation projects generate costs and benefits over several decades, making it difficult to accurately predict future transportation demand, economic growth, inflation, and other key variables. The choice of the social discount rate also has a substantial influence on the results of an economic analysis. However, it is difficult to establish an absolutely objective basis for determining the appropriate discount rate. The fourth category concerns social equity and value judgments. The groups that receive the benefits from a project may differ from those who bear its costs, and the distribution of benefits can vary substantially across regions and income groups. Moreover, the value of the same benefit may be perceived differently depending on a person's income and socioeconomic circumstances. These equity considerations therefore cannot be fully reflected by economic feasibility analysis alone. Ultimately, a single economic indicator such as the BC ratio cannot adequately capture all of the social values and policy considerations involved in a transportation project. Despite these limitations, economic feasibility analysis remains a standard evaluation method. This is not because it provides an absolutely accurate answer, but because it provides a consistent basis for comparing different alternatives. In other words, economic feasibility analysis cannot capture every aspect of social value or policy judgment, but it provides an objective framework for allocating limited public resources more rationally and for protecting policy decisions from undue external pressures. The results of an economic feasibility analysis do not, by themselves, determine a policy decision, because transportation policy must consider not only economic efficiency, but also equity and other social values. In other words, the direction of a policy decision may differ depending on how society chooses to balance efficiency and equity. For example, consider a situation in which a limited budget is available to install either escalators or an elevator at a metro station. If escalators are installed to maximize travel convenience and time savings for the largest possible number of passengers, the policy prioritizes efficiency. On the other hand, if an elevator is installed to ensure the basic right to mobility for people with disabilities and other people with limited mobility, even though it may serve relatively fewer passengers, the policy prioritizes the social value of equity. It is difficult to say that either choice is absolutely right or wrong. Ultimately, an appropriate balance must be found through social consensus, reflecting the values and policy objectives that society seeks to pursue. However, this flexibility in policy judgment should not lead to arbitrary decision-making. Objective and scientific measures, such as cost-benefit analysis, should provide a basic foundation for policy decisions. In practice, transportation decisions can be influenced by local or regional interests, conflicts among stakeholders, and political pressures. In such situations, objective economic feasibility analysis can serve as both a guideline for rational decision-making and a means of protecting rational policy decisions from undue external pressures. If a project that does not meet the economic feasibility criteria must nevertheless be pursued, decision-makers should provide clear and sufficient justification and convincingly explain the rationale to the public and relevant stakeholders. To integrate policy considerations with objective analytical results, South Korea's preliminary feasibility study system considers not only economic feasibility, but also broader factors such as policy considerations and balanced regional development. For comprehensive decision-making, it also uses the analytic hierarchy process, or AHP, as a multi-criteria decision-making method. Even with these institutional arrangements and technical methods, achieving perfect fairness in transportation planning remains a difficult challenge. Therefore, professional ethics and a strong sense of responsibility on the part of analysts are essential for maintaining the scientific credibility and objectivity of analytical results. Without ethical responsibility, even sophisticated institutions and technical methods could turn an evaluation system from a tool for supporting decisions in the public interest into a means of justifying particular interests.
The Preliminary Feasibility Study, or PFS, provides a good example of how transportation projects are evaluated in practice in South Korea. Introduced in 1999, the PFS system plays an important role in national transportation investment planning. It was established to assess the feasibility of large-scale public investment projects before implementation, thereby promoting the efficient allocation of limited public resources and preventing wasteful government spending. The evaluation framework of the PFS broadly considers three areas: economic feasibility, policy considerations, and balanced regional development. The first is economic feasibility analysis. Based on basic data and travel demand forecasts, the benefits and costs of a project are estimated, and its economic feasibility is evaluated using indicators such as the benefit-cost ratio, or BC ratio. The second is policy considerations. These include the need for the project, its consistency with government policies, and the conditions for implementation. They also cover policy effects and potential risks that are difficult to fully quantify through economic feasibility analysis alone. The third area concerns balanced regional development. In addition to overall national efficiency, the evaluation takes regional characteristics and disparities among regions into account. This helps address the potential concentration of large-scale public investment in particular areas and promotes greater social equity. Based on these different evaluation results, a comprehensive assessment is conducted using methods such as the analytic hierarchy process, or AHP, a multi-criteria decision-making method involving a panel of experts. The results are then used to support decisions on whether a project should proceed. In this way, the PFS system does not judge a project solely on the basis of its BC ratio, but considers economic efficiency together with policy needs and regional characteristics. The government also provides common analytical foundations, including national transportation networks, origin-destination or OD data, standardized analytical methods, and evaluation guidelines. These common standards help prevent evaluation results from being distorted by the use of different assumptions or criteria across projects, and make it possible to compare investment alternatives more objectively and consistently. At the same time, as South Korea's transportation infrastructure has gradually reached a more mature stage, an increasing number of projects have difficulty achieving a BC ratio above 1.0 compared with the past. This has increased the need to incorporate values such as environmental quality, safety, and regional characteristics that are difficult to fully capture through conventional economic feasibility analysis. The PFS system has therefore continued to refine its evaluation criteria and methods in response to changes in the social and policy environment. A system such as the PFS plays an important role not only in allocating limited public resources efficiently, but also in reducing arbitrary decision-making driven by political pressure or particular interests. It provides an institutional framework for protecting the policymaking process through objective analysis and rational evaluation. However, no matter how sophisticated laws and institutions may be, they themselves cannot guarantee a desirable future. Institutions provide a basic framework for rational decision-making, but the judgments made within that framework and the future we ultimately create depend on the ethical standards, sense of responsibility, and vision of experts and decision-makers. Transportation planning, too, can move towards a fairer and more sustainable future when professionals respond actively to changing circumstances while maintaining professional competence and a strong sense of responsibility.
This concludes our 12-part lecture series on transportation planning. I hope these lectures have helped you better understand and review the key concepts of transportation planning and travel demand forecasting. Thank you sincerely for joining me throughout this series. I wish you all the best in your studies and professional work. Thank you very much.